The Galactic Assembly rose like a cathedral of impossible architecture, a place where stars themselves seemed to kneel at the feet of those who gathered within. Light refracted through crystal domes suspended in orbit above the planet Zathra, each beam bent into patterns of alien script that shimmered across the vast chamber. Delegates of 100 worlds filled the tiers, their forms varied and strange, towering insectoids whose wings drummed like thunder, scaled titans whose breaths carried the hiss of furnaces, machine intellects projecting themselves as shifting lattices of metal and light. The air was thick with the murmur of countless languages, voices overlapping in a storm of arrogance, fear, and curiosity. They had come to speak of survival. Not survival as any one world understood it, but survival against places the galaxy itself had deemed unlivable, planets whose very existence was an insult to life. Deathworlds. The word carried weight, whispered like a curse. Only a few civilizations could claim to have risen from such places, and those who had wore the title like armor. Each delegate spoke of their trials with theatrical pride, layering stories of environmental fury and evolutionary cruelty. A crystalline matriarch recounted the oceans of her home, seas of ammonia boiling under storms that hurled lightning bolts large enough to shatter mountains. A hulking predator species described jungles so dense with poisonous flora that their young learned to taste death before they could even walk. One by one, they declared that no world could match their suffering. From the shadows of the chamber, a single human listened. Elias Ward sat at the council table with the posture of a soldier long trained to mask his emotions, his plain figure nearly swallowed by the towering forms that surrounded him. No glistening armor, no imposing physique. By comparison to the scaled, clawed, and chitinous leaders around him, he looked almost fragile. His suit was simple, the emblem of Earth stitched across his chest, a circle of blue and green, dwarfed by symbols of galaxies far older and more powerful. He did not speak. He let the council roar and boast, absorbing every detail. His silence became its own presence, a pebble in the still water of arrogance. A six-eyed warlord leaned forward, jaws flexing. Our young are born into volcanic fire. They breathe ash before air. We have conquered a deathworld none but us could endure. The council applauded, their limbs and appendages striking surfaces in ritual acknowledgement. Elias did not move. His expression was unreadable save for the faint curve at the corner of his lips. The insectoid monarch's wings flared as she turned her compound eyes toward him. And what of you, human? Your kind, soft-skinned and fragile-boned, has survived how? What claim have you to sit among us when your body would split under the weight of our gravity, or your flesh would melt in our atmosphere? The room shifted, attention folding inward like a tide dragged toward a single figure. Elias exhaled slowly. He remembered deserts that blistered skin raw, oceans that swallowed ships whole, mountains where men froze staring at the summit they would never reach. He remembered warfields where the air reeked of fire and blood, and men still marched forward. None of it showed on his face. He simply met the insectoid's many-eyed gaze and let the silence stretch long enough that unease stirred among them. Then, with a voice steady and low, he answered. You speak of fire, Elias said. We have walked through fire. You speak of oceans that choke life. We've sailed them, mapped them, conquered them. You speak of jungles thick with poison. Ours are filled with fangs and claws that hunt us in the night. And still we endure. The insectoid hissed in irritation. Exaggeration. Your world is fertile, balanced, green. It is no death world. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The crystalline matriarch tilted her head, refracting light across her angular body. If what he says is true, then Earth is not merely balanced. It is cruel in disguise. A paradise masking the teeth beneath the flowers. Elias let them argue for a moment, his eyes distant but sharp, as though measuring each of them for their weaknesses. At last, he leaned forward, hands clasped. His smirk deepened, not of arrogance, but of someone holding a truth too large to fit into words. You describe your worlds as death worlds, he said. But what you suffer once in a storm, we suffer every season. What your young endure at birth, ours endure from the first breath until the last. On Earth, everything is trying to kill us. The ground itself shakes to swallow us, the skies tear open to drown us, the beasts sharpen their claws on our bones. You think yourselves forged in fire? We are tempered in it. The words were not loud, yet they fell heavy, like stones cast into the silence. Even the machine intelligences, who rarely betrayed emotion, stilled their shimmering forms. The reptilian warlord's jaw hung half open, then snapped shut with a clack of teeth. The insectoid shifted uncomfortably. A few delegates scoffed under their breath, but their voices were thin, defensive. Elias's eyes swept the chamber, calm and unblinking. You want to speak of Deathworlds? He let the question hang, then gave the smallest of shrugs. You already have. You just didn't know its name. The chamber froze. Those who had spoken so proudly of their volcanic planets, their toxic jungles, their storm-torn seas, now stared at him as though he had shifted the axis of the room. He leaned back, expression unreadable once more, only the faint curl of his lips betraying the satisfaction of a soldier who had placed his move with precision. A silence, then a low ripple of voices swelled again, not of arrogance this time, but of doubt and unease. Delegates glanced at one another, the question lingering unsaid. If the human spoke truth, then Earth was not simply another world, it was the death world beyond imagination. Elias folded his arms and closed his eyes for a moment, as though dismissing them all. He had no need to prove himself further, not yet. He had planted the seed. Let them whisper. Let them fear. He would tell them more, soon enough. And as the chamber filled with restless energy, the human smirk remained, a quiet promise of revelations yet to come. The silence that followed Elias's words lingered like the aftershock of a seismic tremor. Delegates who moments before had roared with pride now shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken, their boasts sounding suddenly fragile in their own ears. A ripple of protest finally broke the stillness. The insectoid monarch clattered her mandibles in irritation, her wings trembling with agitation. Your words are bold, human, she hissed. But boldness is not proof. Speak plainly, why should we believe your Earth is the crucible you claim it to be? Elias did not answer immediately. He allowed the weight of her demand to sit heavy in the chamber, studying the alien faces turned toward him. Their eyes glimmered with suspicion, some with disdain, others with the first flickers of curiosity. When he finally rose from his seat, his movements were deliberate, unhurried. He looked like nothing more than a man in a plain suit, yet there was something in the way he held himself, an assurance that made even the tallest reptilian general follow his motion with wary attention. You want proof, Elias said evenly. Then hear what we call ordinary. He began with the skies. He spoke of storms that spanned entire oceans, where winds tore steel from its foundations and waves rose higher than cities. He described lightning that could shatter trees into splinters in the blink of an eye, striking with a violence that never asked permission. Some of the crystalline beings murmured in disbelief. Their storms were measured in centuries, not in hours of unrelenting chaos. Yet Elias pressed on, his voice steady, never exaggerating, only recounting. He moved to the lands themselves, earthquakes that split the ground without warning, mountains vomiting fire that turned day into night, rivers of molten stone reshaping landscapes in moments. To many of the gathered species, such cataclysms were ancient memories, long relegated to myth. But for humans, he explained, these were not myths. They were part of life's cycle, challenges his kind had faced again and again across generations, leaving scars etched into both history and flesh. Then he spoke of the living world, of beasts born with claws meant to tear through flesh, of venomous serpents coiled in shadows, of insects carrying sickness invisible yet devastating. He painted images of great cats stalking through grasslands, of wolves hunting in silence with tireless persistence, of microscopic organisms waging endless war against human bodies. Our predators, Elias said quietly, are not confined to story or legend. They breathe with us, hunt with us, adapt with us. And still we endure. The machine entities pulsed uneasily at that word, adapt. To them, adaptation was an algorithm, a line of code evolving. For humans, it was survival written in blood and willpower. Yet Elias was not finished. His gaze swept across the council as he leaned closer, his voice dropping, forcing them to listen with sharpened focus. You pride yourselves on mastery of singular environments. But we have no such luxury. We live everywhere. Frozen wastelands where air itself bites like knives. Burning deserts where water vanishes before it touches the ground. Mountains so high they steal the breath from your lungs. Jungles so thick that every step is a wager against poison or predator. We do not merely survive in one place, we claim them all. We bend, we adapt, and when adaptation is not enough, we build. The reptilian warlord narrowed his eyes, scales glinting in the chamber's light. Words, he spat. You dress them well, but still they are only words. Elias met his glare without flinching. Then let me make it plain, he replied. We should not exist. By every measure of probability, Earth should have extinguished us before we learned to stand upright. Yet here I am, speaking to you. Do you think that happened by chance? Or because we were too stubborn to die? The chamber fell quiet again. The insectoid monarch clicked her mandibles but said nothing further. Even the crystalline matriarch seemed to dim slightly, refracting less light, as though absorbing his claim. Elias's words were not a performance, there was no embellishment, no attempt at grandeur. He spoke as a man recalling what he had seen and survived, as someone who knew that truth was sharper than any fiction. A younger delegate, one of the smaller machine projections, flickered uneasily. And still, it said in a metallic whisper, "You call this place home?" Elias gave a faint shrug, his smirk returning, though there was no humor in it. "What else should we call it? It made us what we are. Every scar, every victory, every step forward was earned by facing what tried to end us. On Earth, nothing is given freely. Survival is the price we pay for breathing." The words resonated. Even those who distrusted him could not deny the conviction behind them. It was not the arrogance of someone seeking glory, but the certainty of one who had walked through fire and lived to tell of it. Elias could see the shift in the room, subtle yet unmistakable. Pride gave way to doubt. Doubt gave way to unease. And unease edged toward something else, respect, or perhaps fear. He did not press further. He had said enough to carve the first cracks in their disbelief, and pushing harder now would only dull the blade. Instead, he straightened, his smirk fading into an expression of calm finality. "You asked for proof. You will have it. But not in numbers or charts, not in the kind of evidence you weigh in sterile halls. You will have it in the understanding that while your species endured your world, ours mastered a world that never ceased trying to erase us. That is why I sit here. That is why Earth is the Deathworld you fear without knowing its name." With that, Elias returned to his seat. His silence closed around him like armor, daring any delegate to challenge him again. None spoke immediately. The warlord's claws scraped faintly against the stone of his armrest, but even he held his tongue. The insectoid's wings twitched restlessly, yet she, too, remained still. The assembly shifted in unease, not because of what Elias had threatened, but because of what he had revealed, that perhaps the smallest, plainest figure in the chamber represented a world more brutal than all their boasts combined. And though no one would admit it aloud, the thought pressed itself into every mind. If Earth truly was what he claimed, then humanity was not simply another young race. It was something altogether more dangerous. The session adjourned in restless murmurs, voices layered with disbelief, suspicion, and a gnawing curiosity none could entirely shake. Elias did not watch them scatter. He sat quietly, hands folded, as though the weight of centuries of survival rested easily on his shoulders. In his stillness was a promise unspoken, that he had only begun to tell the story. The chamber doors closed behind the departing delegates, but their whispers carried into the corridors, seeding doubt, fear, and fascination in equal measure. And Elias, left alone in the echoing vastness, allowed himself the faintest smile, knowing they would return, demanding more. The chamber had not cooled by the time the council reconvened. The vast hall of crystal and alloy seemed charged, as though Elias's words from the previous gathering had seeped into the walls themselves. Delegates sat sharper in their places, no longer slouched in arrogance, their gazes angled toward the lone human at the table's edge. The air thrummed with a question none had asked directly. Was he telling the truth, or was he weaving a myth to elevate his fragile species into the company of predators and giants? The reptilian warlord broke the silence first, his scales catching the light as he leaned forward, massive claws curling against the surface of the table. His voice was a low rumble, heavy with disdain. "You claim much, human. You paint storms and beasts as though they were enemies equal to empires. Yet still, you breathe. If your world is as cruel as you say, then prove it with deeds. Show us the strength of your people, not the poetry of your tongue." Elias raised his eyes to meet the warlord's glare. There was no fear in them, only a weary patience, as though he had expected the challenge long before it was spoken. He stood slowly, letting the murmurs quiet, and his voice carried clearly when he answered. "You want proof? Then hear the record of what we endured, not from our legends, but from our history." He began with the cold. He spoke of men who crossed endless stretches of frozen tundra, their breath crystallizing in the air, their bodies starving, yet they were refusing to surrender. He told of explorers who braved nights so long and dark that madness whispered in every shadow, yet they pressed onward until their names were carved into maps that stretched across the world. He moved then to heat, to deserts where the sun burned unrelentingly, where sand swallowed bones and water was rarer than gold. Yet in those same deserts, he explained, human civilizations rose, building cities of stone and trade routes that spanned continents. "We do not retreat from the places that try to kill us," Elias said. "We build homes there. We raise our children there. We make the impossible ordinary." The insectoid monarch clicked her mandibles but said nothing. Her wings, restless before, were still now. The crystalline matriarch tilted her angular head, refracting Elias's words in silence. He pressed on, recounting tales of endurance in the jungles where sickness lurked in every bite of an insect, where predators waited with patient hunger. Men carved paths through those jungles, braving fever and venom, until rivers became roads and wilderness became familiar. He spoke of mountains so high they stripped oxygen from the lungs, yet men climbed, defying the sky itself, standing on summits where even the stars seemed within reach. The warlord's expression shifted, the arrogance in his eyes dimming to a sharper interest. Still he challenged, his voice cutting through the chamber. Hardships, yes. But any species can endure when pressed. What makes humans different? Why should your suffering elevate you above us all? Elias did not hesitate. He leaned forward, his voice resonant with a quiet ferocity. Because we endure not once, but again and again. We adapt to every cruelty. We are not bred for one hardship. We are shaped by all of them. And when hardship is not enough, we make war on each other, pushing ourselves beyond what any world demands. We are our own fiercest enemy, and still, we rise. The chamber stilled. Murmurs rippled through the tears, unease mingled with awe. For the first time, some of the council leaned closer rather than away, drawn by the raw conviction in his words. Elias allowed them no respite. He spoke of wars fought in frozen trenches, where men lived weeks knee-deep in mud, surrounded by fire and death, yet refused to surrender an inch. He told of armies marching through deserts with little more than determination to sustain them, of battles fought in jungles where the air itself tried to suffocate the living. He painted pictures of survival against odds so crushing that any other species might have bowed to extinction, yet humanity clawed its way forward, step by bloody step. And when the world itself could no longer hold us, Elias continued, his voice rising, we looked upward. We strapped ourselves to fire and hurled our fragile bodies into the void, a place even you feared to linger. We walked on airless rock, looked down on the planet that tried to kill us, and claimed it as ours still. Tell me, warlord, what other species here has dared to leave the grasp of their deathworld not out of necessity, but out of sheer will to see what lay beyond? The reptilian general shifted, his claws still against the table now, the fire of defiance dimmed. His silence spoke louder than denial. One of the machine entities pulsed a pattern of light, its voice mechanical but edged with something almost like wonder. If this is true, then humanity does not merely endure death. It seeks it, confronts it, overcomes it. To survive Earth is to survive anything. Elias's gaze swept the chamber, his face composed though his words carried weight like a hammer. You sit here boasting of your deathworlds, your single trials of survival. But Earth is not one trial. It is all of them, unending. And yet here I stand before you. Not because we are strongest. Not because we are fastest. But because when the world demanded our extinction, we refused. Again and again, we refused. The council was silent, transfixed by the force of his words. Some looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Others stared openly, fear mingling with something else, respect, reluctant and heavy. At last, Elias stepped back from the table. His smirk returned, faint but undeniable. You call Earth a deathworld. We call it home. That is the difference. We do not flee from it, we do not curse it. We rise because of it. And should any of you doubt it still, remember this, if we could survive the place that never stops trying to kill us, what chance does anything else have? The chamber held its breath. The reptilian warlord's claws twitched but he said nothing more. The insectoid monarch's wings shivered faintly, as though resisting the urge to fold in submission. Even the crystalline matriarch, ageless and vast, inclined her head with the barest gesture of acknowledgement. Elias did not revel in their silence. He only let it hang, heavy and undeniable, before he lowered himself back into his seat. His eyes closed briefly, as though the weight of memory pressed against him, but when they opened again, they burned steady with conviction. No one challenged him further. The session ended not in argument but in silence, the kind that follows revelation too sharp to ignore. Delegates filed out with slower steps, their pride wounded, their minds shaken by the knowledge that the human had not exaggerated. He had spoken truth. And truth was far heavier than they had been prepared to carry. When Elias was left alone in the hall, he sat motionless for a time, the faintest echo of a smile playing at his lips. He had not come to terrify them, not to boast or threaten. Yet the truth had done what boasting never could, it had planted fear and respect in equal measure. And in that moment, he knew the council would never look at Earth, or its people, the same way again. The council gathered for the final session under a silence so taut it seemed the chamber itself held its breath. The usual rumble of competing voices, the clash of pride and argument, had drained away. Every delegate turned their attention toward the human who had, in a handful of days, unsettled centuries of certainty. Elias Ward sat alone at the edge of the great table, hands folded, posture unassuming, yet his very presence weighed on them. He had no armies, no technology superior to their own. What he carried was heavier, a truth no one could unhear. The crystalline matriarch rose first, her magnificent body shimmering in solemn hues. "Delegates," she intoned, her voice resonating like glass struck with a hammer, "we are tasked with naming the world most hostile to life, to decide which species has endured the unendurable. Yet I find my thoughts troubled. For if Earth is as its envoy claims, then we have not merely overlooked it. We have underestimated it gravely." Murmurs rippled through the tiers. The insectoid monarch hissed softly, her wings half-folded, her pride still raw from the dismantling of her earlier arrogance. "Words are not proof," she protested, though without the bite she once carried. "And yet, if there is even half-truth in his claim, then humanity is not weak. It is something else." The reptilian warlord slammed his clawed hand against the table, the sound like a crack of thunder. Something else indeed. Dangerous. If his kind truly thrive on a world where everything seeks their death, then they are not allies to welcome. They are predators who would see us as prey. His slitted eyes bored into Elias, his voice thick with both fear and defiance. "Tell me, human, what stops your people from turning that will, the one that has bent Earth itself, against us?" All eyes shifted. Elias rose slowly, the motion unhurried but deliberate, his gaze steady as he faced the warlord directly. He looked tired, not with weakness, but with the weight of one who had carried his species' story through fire and blood. His words came low, controlled, each one chosen with the care of a man who knew they would echo long after he spoke them. "What stops us?" he said. "The same thing that has always stopped us, choice. You speak as if survival is conquest, as if to endure is to dominate. But survival is not victory. Survival is living to build, to create, to see another dawn. Earth made us fierce, yes. It taught us to fight, to endure. But it also taught us something harder, restraint. Mercy. Because when everything around you wants you dead, the only way forward is to find strength in one another." The warlord's eyes narrowed, but his claws no longer clenched. Elias took a step forward, his voice gaining force, not through volume, but through the gravity of conviction. "We fight not because we love war. We fight because we love living. Every step humanity has taken was carved from struggle, not for the joy of the struggle, but for the chance to make something beyond it: art, music, families, hope. You think us predators, warlord? We are not defined by the kill. We are defined by what we build after the killing is done." The crystalline matriarch inclined her head, light scattering across the chamber. "And yet," she said slowly, "the danger remains. A people tempered by death may outlast us all. Some here will fear that truth. Some here already do." Elias turned his gaze across the council, letting it sweep the delegates one by one. His eyes were steady, but behind them lay the unspoken memory of deserts crossed, oceans sailed, wars endured. "You should fear us," he said finally, and the blunt honesty of the words drew a collective intake of breath. He allowed the silence to sharpen before continuing. "Not because we wish you harm. Not because we hunger for conquest. But because if we survive a world that never stops trying to kill us, then nothing you can throw at us will finish what our own home could not. Fear us because we will endure. Respect us because we choose what we become with that endurance." The insectoid monarch's wings shivered, not with anger this time, but with unease that bordered on respect. The machine entities flickered their forms in acknowledgement, their logic struggling to refute a truth they could not disprove. Even the reptilian warlord, his chest heaving with restrained fury, could not summon another challenge. His silence was its own concession. The crystalline matriarch raised her arms, the chamber filling with refracted light. "Then let it be declared. The assembly recognizes Earth as the truest of Deathworlds. And its people, humans, shall be marked in the record as both warning and lesson. They are not to be underestimated. They are not to be dismissed." A resonance filled the chamber, not applause, not celebration, but something older, acknowledgement. One by one, delegates bowed their heads or shifted their forms in the gesture of their people, reluctant yet genuine. The words were recorded, etched into the council's archives, history rewritten in the span of moments. Elias did not bow. He stood silent, his face composed, his eyes betraying neither triumph nor fear. He had not come to seek their approval, nor to revel in their awe. He had come to tell them the truth. That alone was victory enough. When the session dissolved, the reptilian warlord remained seated, watching him with an intensity that cut sharper than any blade. At last, he rose, his heavy steps carrying him across the chamber until he stood towering over the human. His voice was low, nearly a growl. "You speak of choice, human. You speak of restraint. Tell me this, when your world has made you so unyielding, so relentless, what happens when choice fails?" Elias met his gaze without flinching. His answer came quiet, almost weary, yet sharp enough to pierce the silence. "Then we endure the consequences. Because that, too, is survival." For a long moment, the warlord held his stare. Then, with a sharp hiss, he turned and strode away, his silence conceding what pride would not allow him to say. The chamber emptied at last, its echoes fading into the vastness beyond. Elias stood alone once more, his figure small against the enormity of alien architecture. Yet in that stillness, there was no fragility. Only the weight of a world carried in his shoulders, a world that had shaped him into something the galaxy now both feared and respected. He allowed himself a final smirk, the same faint curve of defiance and pride that had unsettled the council from the very beginning. "They spoke of a death world beyond imagination," he murmured to the silence. "And I told them the truth. That's Earth.